Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow, what a pleasure. First of all, let me say what a pleasure it is to see Rodney again. It's been a few years. He wasn't lying. We had some great times. This is an amazing business. But I just told him backstage, I really, really love what he's doing here with Awaken. It's different. To me, it's different than many others that I've known of and that even a few have been involved with. And most of the reason for that is because I think it's not just about bringing in a paycheck. You want to get better inside and outside. You want to feel better about yourselves, mental health, all of that. It's wonderful. So I wish you the best with that. I also want to add a quick, I met Pat briefly backstage. She said hello to me. I had no idea he had moved. I'm back there, he's Jansen. That was impressive. Hey, listen, so I know that as the years have gone by, many of you out there, by this point, you may never have heard of my name before now. Some of you are familiar with my story. Others, as I go, will probably remember certain things as I tell you. But what I want to do, I was fortunate enough to compete in 4 different Olympic Games. Danielle talked earlier about not quitting, about staying with it. And I think, maybe most of all, my story comes down to that. You'll understand when I tell you. But I want to share a little bit about the 4 games that I competed in, but the lessons I learned at those games, because they were all so different for me. I grew up in a suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I started skating. We have some cheese heads down there. I started skating when I was 4 years old. Grew up doing all other sports, but in the winters it was skating. It was going fast, and I started racing. Well, by the time I was 14, I was very aware of what the Olympic Games were. There was a man that was the same Olympics he talked about, the hockey team in 1980, winning the gold medal, beating the Russians, and then going on to win gold. A speed skater by the name of Eric Heiden, also from Wisconsin. That same year was a bit overshadowed by the U.S. hockey team, but he did something no one will ever do again in the history of the Olympic Games. Certainly in our sport, but maybe in any other sport. We have 5 individual races from 500 meters, which is just over a quarter mile, to 10,000 meters, which is over 6 miles. And all the distances in between, and he won gold in all of them. Never, ever be done again. And I watched that, and I knew Eric, and I knew then I wanted to go to the Olympic Games. I knew I wanted to be an Olympian. I wanted to represent the United States at the Olympic Games. That was my dream. I had no dreams of being another Eric Heiden. I had no dreams of even winning a medal. But those dreams would evolve. But 4 years later, one of those dreams came true, and I was able to represent the United States. I was an 18-year-old kid fresh out of high school, and I made my first Olympic team. I'll never forget that first one. It was probably the purest of all the games, the most innocent, if you will. I had no expectations. My goal, my dream had been met by being there, by making the team, and now the rest of it was icing on the cake. Now I'm meeting other athletes from other sports that I've watched on TV for so many years. I got to go up march in the opening ceremony behind the U.S. flag and the American team. And when the Olympic flame went out that year, I was 4th best in the world. I finished 4th place in the 500-meter event. I missed the bronze medal by 16 100ths of a second. I spent some time trying to figure that out, and how much time that is. It's basically, that's about 16 100ths of a second. But to be honest, I wasn't disappointed. I was happy. I was proud of myself. As I said, I got there. That was my goal for that year, and I almost came home with a medal. But I knew there was hopefully good times ahead and a lot of success ahead. I remember coming home from the games that year. They were held in a country that unfortunately doesn't even exist anymore, in Yugoslavia, in Sarajevo. I'm flying home. I'm thinking, man, you just got 4th at the Olympics. It's kind of embarrassing, but here's what my thought was. I'm thinking, I wonder if they're going to have a parade for me when I get home. I didn't get my parade. I got home and I got some Gee, in fourth place, that's too bad. You know, nice try. Maybe next time, no medal. And it opened my eyes quite a bit to what you all see, what you watch, what the media presents, and to what we go through. And I get it. You know, you see us kind of once every 4 years if you're watching the Olympic Games. If not, you may never see us. But there's expectations put on us that are sometimes fair, sometimes unfair. I would go through the whole gamut of those. But one of the biggest things I learned from that experience in my first games was about success. What is success? How do you measure success? Maybe who should be the measure of your success? If I gave each one of you a piece of paper right now and told you to write down your definition of success, I don't know how many people are in here, 1,000, 1,500, there would probably be at least 500 different definitions of success. And none of them wrong, by the way. But it's interesting because there are so many. One of my favorites, though, that comes from a man, and some of you in my generation may have heard of a basketball coach, UCLA, legend by the name of John Wooden. John Wooden's teams won 88 straight games at one point. They won 10 or 11 straight national championships. So the Final Four, March Madness, 10, 11 in a row. And he was asked to define success. His definition of success was this. He said, success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction and knowing you've done your best to become the best that you can become. So this guy's team's won all these games, all these championships. He's defining success. He doesn't use what word? What word does he not use? Yeah, I heard somebody say it, winning. Never talks about winning, never spoke to it about his team. He knew that if each one of them did their best in their position, they would come together, the results would take care of itself. I come to love this quote many years after my first Olympics, but I kind of wish I had known it back then. Well, as I move on, after my first Olympics, things start to go very well for me. Now, as I get bigger, stronger, technically better on the ice, my times are coming down, I'm getting faster. I'm starting to win medals now, internationally. The World Cups are World Championships. I knew that if I continued to improve at this rate, I would probably go into my second Olympics as a favorite for one medal, possibly two. Before I get to my second game, so just a couple things I want to share. A couple, again, lessons I learned of training, the whole experience of life as an athlete. And one of those things is something that is and should probably be very important to all of you as you embark on your business. And it's about goals. It's about setting goals, maybe a different way to look at setting goals. And so for me, our sport is a very physical one. It's off-season. It is a lot of weight training, a lot of cycling, a lot of running hills, jumping upstairs, one leg. Every Sunday morning we used to drive out to the nearest ski hill in my home, and we would run up and down this ski hill a dozen times or so. We would leap all the way to the top, 2 legs and 1 leg, everything down in that skating position, very low, for power, speed, strength, endurance. And one Sunday morning we were out there, and I was having a rough day. Somebody else said it again earlier, every day is not going to be world class, no matter what you do. Some days you feel like I'd never stepped on the ice before. I was having a hard day running hills this day, and I told my coach, we had done about 10 hills, and he said, all right, 30 seconds, we're going again. And I looked at him and I said, Coach, I think I'm done. I am maxed out. I think I'm going to be sick, not feeling well today. He said, okay. He said, if you can give me one more, I want you to think about something. He said, every time when we start, he said, when I start this watch, from the time you get here to the top of the hill, he said, you never take your eyes off the top of the hill. And I said, so what? You know, I'm half sick. I'm just, what are you telling me this for? And he said, because the top of the hill is the goal. He said, that's where you want to end up. He said, but once you start running, I don't want you looking up there. I want you to look 10 feet in front of you. He said, you know where you want to end up. Look 10 feet ahead, and another 10, and another 10, and pretty soon you'll look up and you'll be at the top. And as simple as that sounds today, trying to describe it, I never thought of it that way. I never thought about my goals that way. My goals were always long-term. Goals were always the Olympic Games. Well, the Olympic Games, guess what? Once every 4 years. We don't have Olympics every year. We have other very important competitions. But the ultimate one is every 4 years. You can't live and train mentally or physically that way. One step at a time, 10 feet at a time. And when you set your goals, I urge you to do it that way. And the other thing that I learned a great deal about, even though I come from a sport that's very individual, I'm out there against the clock. There's another guy in the lane next to me, but I'm racing really against the clock. And so everybody thinks it's a very individual sport, yes. But you know what? Teamwork is everything. In anything we do, I don't believe that there's any totally self-made success story. Everybody who's been successful at any level, anything they do, has had help. Parents, teachers, coaches, mentors, whoever that may be. They've had help. They've learned from others. And I also urge you to do that. Now, I mentioned I'm from Wisconsin, but I didn't mention it. I grew up with the youngest of 9 children in my family. Now, I'm the baby of 9. All my brothers and sisters had skated at some point before I did. But as I was going through my career, I talk about teamwork, and I would say my family was probably the biggest part of my team. I had great teammates and great coaches, but my family was always there. The good times and the bad. And I would need that. I would need it very much so in what would be my second Olympic Games. I won my first World Championship 1 week before the Olympic Games in 1988 in Calgary. I'm going there as a favorite now for gold. My family was going through a tough time at this point. My sister Jane, the youngest of my 5 sisters, after the birth of her 3rd little girl, was diagnosed with leukemia. Jane went through a year that I can't describe to you, ups and downs, in and out of remission several times. She had a bone marrow transplant, which took for a while. We were so hopeful, and then back in pain. And God knows why, but these 2 worlds, my training for an upcoming Olympics, and now being favored for gold, and Jane's literal fight for her life, came together on the very same day. It's Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1988, the day of the 500 meters, a race in which, as I said, now I'm favored for a gold medal. I spoke to Jane for the last time that morning. Jane wanted me to skate. She wanted me to win. I wanted both of those things very much, but I also wanted to be home. I wanted to be by her side. I wanted to be with the half of the family that was home with her. Maybe some of you here remember 100 meters into the race, my very first stroke into the first turn, I fell, crashed into the pads. 4 days later, the 1,000 meters, the only other distance that I would skate, I'm leading with just a half lap to go. I'm on a world record pace, and I fell again. Now, we all fall down. We all get knocked down. We all get here. You guys probably hear more no's than you're going to hear yeses, right? It happens to all of us. It doesn't happen always in front of the world, like it did in my case, but it happens. There are times that we have to, you got to figure it out. You got to decide it. Am I knocked out or am I knocked down? If I'm knocked out, generally I'm not getting up again. If I'm knocked down, I get up, I take a step and another step, and I move forward. And you keep moving forward. And for me, look, I think looking back, probably the biggest thing I learned from that whole experience, Jane's diagnosis a full year before the games, and then my being favored and falling at those games, was that the greatest thing may happen to you or the worst thing may happen to you, but you have got to learn. You've got to learn from every situation. Everything that happens, take a step back and try to learn from it. I won't stand up here and tell you I went to bed that night and said, Jane's gone. She has 3 little babies at home. I didn't cross the finish line. 2 races I was going to win gold medals in. What do I learn from this? I know life doesn't work that way. I get it. But eventually you can. Eventually you can take that step back and you can see a little more clearly. And you can learn something. And then you can move forward. And then things can start happening. So after those games, I sort of made a promise to myself. I said, look, if I'm going to continue skating, and if I want to be successful, define your own success. What is that for you? Is it a gold medal? Is it $1 million? Is it just to be happy? For me, success became looking back after a race, knowing that there's not one more thing that I could have done to be at my best on that day. If I could answer those questions, yes, then that was success. The result would take care of itself. And the result did take care of itself for 4 years. 4 great years in between the Olympics, more world titles, more world championships. 2 weeks before my 3rd Olympics, set my first world record. Going into my 3rd Olympics, heavily favored again. Never forget it. It was in France. It was outdoors. Our last time we would ever race outdoors at the Olympics. Raining, terrible conditions, terrible weather. I didn't care. I race against these guys week in and week out. I beat them week in and week out. I can do it again. Of course, now the press is making this a big deal because of last time and my sister in the falls. But I knew I was there to do, and I went out and did it. Well, the bottom line, 3 guys beat me. 500, I finished 4th place. 2 of which had never beaten me before. It was going to be a showdown between my friend from Germany and myself for gold. And he won gold and I finished 4th. A much different feeling than that 4th place in my first Olympics, because this time I knew him. I knew I should have won. I wasn't just happy to be there. And it hurts. Look, we're athletes, but we're human, and it hurts. And I spent some time wondering what went wrong. I remember lying in bed that night. But then I remember asking myself those questions. I said, hey, did you prepare yourself best you could? 100%? Yes. Did you go out and do the best you could? Yes. Maybe I could have performed better, but I did the best I could. I tried my hardest. So I knew I had to start taking my own advice. Well, the very next morning I had to have breakfast with my dad. And in order for this story to mean something, I have to go back. So when I was a kid, never forget it, 12 years old, I'm getting ready for my first national championship. My dad, if you ever had the pleasure of meeting my father, big guy, quiet guy, he didn't say a lot, but when he did, it always meant something, and it always could make us feel better with just a word or a sentence. And I'm 12, my first nationals, I'm so excited. My mom and dad drive us up to Minnesota for the weekend competition. Long story short, one kid beats me. In my age group, I finished 2nd. My brother Mike wins in his division. He's a national champion. I'm running up. I'm devastated. We got 6 hours to drive back home. That Sunday night, I cried in the back seat for roughly 6 hours. And my poor mom and dad are in the front seat. And I remember getting home, and I'm thinking, all right, my dad says, all right, when we get in, he says, go sit in the living room and wait for me. So I'm sitting there. My dad comes in, and he doesn't even sit down. I'm sitting on a chair. He's just standing there, and he says, and I'm thinking, by this point, he made me wait 6 hours, right? This is going to be the greatest thing I've ever heard. He looks me straight in the eye, and he says, Dan, he says, there's more to life than skating around in a circle. Swear to God. There's more to life than skating around in a circle. I was speechless. My mouth wide open. He left the room, and I didn't see him again. And I'm pretty sure, I was sure he was going to come back and finish his story, right? He never saw him. I sort of let that go because I guess he was frustrated, right? I just couldn't understand how he could demean my whole existence like this. Hadn't thought about it much. 10 years, literally 10 years go by. 88 Olympics, Jane passes away, I fall twice. Those words came back to me after that. And I hadn't thought about it for 10 years, and then I remembered there's more to life. And skating must have meant. Look, skating's as important as you want to make it in life, right? You can train as hard as you can train, be as good as you can be. Skating's never, ever going to be who you are. Skating is what you do. Who you are is determined by how you react to the things that happen in what you do. That's who you are. And so, now we're in Albertville and we're having breakfast after I finished fourth. And I'm wondering what magic words he's got this time, right? And I'm thinking, Dad, I know there's more to life. I know this. This time he said a couple things. He started with the things that, quite frankly, I would have loved to hear back when I was 12. Hey, proud of you. He said, we know you're the best. They know it didn't happen today. You did your best. But then my dad looked me in the eye. He said 3 words to me that I will take to my grave. I will never, ever forget this moment. He looked straight at me and he said, you're my hero. And for that to come from my hero, I can't describe for you what it did to me. I walked out of the restaurant like if there was a stage this high, I could have just floated. It was, to this day, the most surreal thing that I'd ever had spoken to me or felt. I can't explain it, but somehow I was my dad's hero, and it made life okay. And now, for the first and only time in the history of the Olympic Games, we only had 2 years to wait for another Olympics. You may or may not know they used to do the Winter and Summer Games in the same year. They decided back in 1994 they would start stagger them, so there would be a Summer Games and then 2 years later a Winter and summer. So once and once only we'd have 2 years. I knew I wasn't finished. I was still getting better. I knew that I was still the best, but I hadn't done it at the Olympic Games. I had one thing I hadn't accomplished yet. But more so I was having fun, and I still loved what I did. You have to understand, for me back then, I had, as I said, 2 distances I skated. The 500 meters for me was a race I dominated for almost 10 years. The 1,000 for me was a weakness. It was a weakness more mentally than anything. I had the speed, the strength, I even had the endurance, but for some reason, during the race, I would start to tire in the last lap. When you do that over and over, your mind starts to think you're going to get tired in the last lap, right? So the 1,000 meters was not my distance. When I got home from my 3rd games, people said, you know, you got 2 years, 2 more years. Forget about the 1,000 meters. You train for that 1,000 meters, your 500 is going to suffer, and you won't win a medal in either distance. My coach and I didn't believe this. We knew how to train for both. In fact, we went even further. We trained 1,500, so my 1,000 would get stronger. Not worrying I was going to lose my speed in the 500. There's a great saying, and it applies to you as well. It says, you cannot discover new oceans unless you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. You can't be afraid to fail. You can't be afraid to be innovative, to try new things. You can't be afraid of people's reactions. If you're going to be successful, you have to.
100%.
For lack of a better word,
okay.
you have to go
You can be afraid.
You have to be all
Just don't
in.
let it stop you.
And so we did. The last 2 years of my career were the best I've ever had. 8 world records over those 2 seasons. December, just before the games in February, became the first person to ever break the 36-second barrier in the 500. I know time-wise that doesn't mean anything to you, but think about it this way. Training for that 1,000 didn't hurt my 500. It helped it. Don't ignore your weaknesses. It's easy to do when you're good at something, you want to keep going, and it's fun to win, it's fun to, but don't ignore these, because when you work on your weaknesses, guess what happens? These get better too. Your strengths can improve as well. And so, it is now 1994, 6 years to the day of Jane's death. My first fall at the games in Calgary is the 500 meters. Lillehammer, Norway. I'm going into these games more favored than I had ever been. The 5 fastest times in history in the 500 were all mine. If I go out and skate a normal, decent, solid race, finally this saga is going to come to a happy ending. I knew what February 14th was. My family knows it. It was okay. I was mentally prepared. Always am for that day. Long story short, I get off to a good start, get a great first turn, good backstretch, and on the last turn, there's only 2 turns in the 500. Last turn, feeling great, maybe too good, pushed a little too hard in the beginning of the turn, and the ice broke away underneath me. I slipped. I didn't fall, but I slipped. And I slipped a lot and lost all my speed and all my momentum. And when you do that in a 500 meters race that's decided by tenths or hundredths of a second, it'll cost you a medal. Guess what? It did. 4 Olympics of my race. I've gone by not only no gold medal, no medal of any color. If you had asked anybody in our sport the last 50 years, they would have said it's impossible. And yet it was my reality. And I had 3 days. I had 3 days to prepare for what? For the 1,000 meters. For the race that people told me to forget about. The race that I didn't even care for that much 2 years before. But a race I knew I was prepared for this time. 100%. All in, mentally, physically, and I knew it. Getting ready to go online, I'm going to share with you 2 thoughts that went through my mind, and strange time for them to enter my mind, but they did. One was a press conference we had as we got to Norway. About 400, 500 reporters in a room. I was almost finished. The guy stands up way in the back of the room. He says, Dan, he says, you realize if you come out of the Olympics again without a medal, you'll probably go down in history as the greatest speed skater never to have won an Olympic medal. Yeah, and I said, yeah, sir, thanks for pointing that out. I said, you know, the way I choose to look at it, I said, over the last 4 Olympics, I've also had the opportunity to become one of the most successful Olympians ever. I said, maybe that didn't happen, sir, but I've had that opportunity. I was thankful for that opportunity, and thankful to have another one. And there are a lot of negatives out there. You're going to find them. You're going to encounter them. You probably have already. Take those and flip them over. You can turn negatives into positives by choice if you want. It can change the way you wake up in the morning, I promise you. And then the last thought went through my mind was, I told you a lot about my dad. This one was my mom's, actually. When I was a kid, for some reason, I wanted to know if we were rich. And I asked my mom, well, I told you we have 9 children. My dad was a police officer. My mom was a nurse. You guys can do the math on the finances, right? But my mom's answer was, yes, we're rich because we have 9 children. Always taught us just to be thankful for the things we have. Not bitter about things, maybe not worry about things we don't have, or maybe never would have. So I thought, you know what? A little over a minute. My Olympics are over. I'm not going for 5. This is it. There's a wonderful saying about champions, maybe you've heard it. It says, champions do not become champions when they win the event, but in the hours, weeks, months, and years they spend preparing for it. You can take all my other wins, all the World Cup wins, all the world records, doesn't matter. You can take, I felt like, believe me, I wanted this. I felt like I deserved it. I was good, did the best, and I worked hard. But I didn't feel it was necessary for me to be a happy person the rest of my life. I didn't feel, I knew I would be judged. But if you can live with the judgment, then it simply doesn't matter. And so I went to the line with all these thoughts in my head, but mostly, Danielle talked about this as well, mostly with a belief. Most people didn't believe I could win the 1,000 meters. I did. I knew I was skating well. So what? I slipped in the 500. A slip doesn't mean you're skating bad. It means you slip. I knew how I was skating. And I felt good. And I thought, let's go give this a shot. And so if you didn't see it then, I'm going to show you this right now. You're going to notice the call of this race. It's 2.5 laps, many different languages, but it'll give you an idea. By this point, there were quite a few people following this story throughout the world.
Well, that man, Jansen, a brilliant sprinter, fantastic technique at the start, but in the past has fallen apart on the final lap. Just watch him go here.
Ah, j'avoue que cela me rechaufferait le cœur que de voir Jansen dont les valeurs personnelles et olympiques.
Noch hat er den Vorsprung. Noch kann er hier gewinnen. Noch kann er eine Medaille holen. Now the home stretch.
I was so shocked, I was so happy, so all these emotions. If I would have let myself, I could have had tears just streaming down my face. And I remember vividly sitting on this bench and just shaking and holding back tears.
Gold medalist.
Premier et champion olympique.
Jansen,
Jansen takes a victory lap. With the knowledge that he has fulfilled what he always intended to do. The words, I do not try to be better than anybody else. I only try to be better than myself. A few minutes earlier,